Obviously, the biggest shark blockbuster of all time is Jaws, but in my opinion, comparatively, nothing of that caliber when it comes to sharks has been released since. Nothing that really captivates that sinking feeling of being stalked by an apex predator in the vast, dark ocean waters. Except for the movie Deep Blue Sea. With movies like Sharknado, 47 Meters Down, and The Meg, it isn't a wonder why Deep Blue Sea stands out after all this time. For some reason, modern-day shark movies have made sharks the punchline of a joke. But there was a time where their brain size had increased and they were capable of creating intricate plans in order to lure humans through an underwater facility and take freedom into their own hands. Now, they just take advantage of an opportunity by waiting for a lonely person to float aimlessly out in the water, or they are literally flying through the air and eating people. There is no in-between. But we can argue the best shark movies depict sharks as tyrants of the sea, willing to outthink, outhunt, and outpace anything and everything that stands in its way. Not mindlessly, but intelligently. So let's take a dive into the facility with the weekend crew in Deep Blue Sea. But first, please remember to like the video if you like the video and subscribe to the channel. I upload every week, sometimes twice if I can find the time. So follow for more content like this. Also, if you could hit the hype button because it helps out the channel's visibility like a lot, that would be great. Okay, let's get started. Our introduction to this movie is a shark attack. Several teens are out in the middle of the ocean drinking, having a good time on their boat. It takes a second, but you realize that the scene is a misdirect. It's a play on movies within the genre that a shark is just mindlessly going about and attacking random boats, when really this scene is used to set up the real plot of the movie. These sharks are strong, smart, and they are also living in captivity. And in the next scene, we see exactly why. Dr. Susan works at a research facility studying Alzheimer's. She promises her benefactors that she will give results to them that will blow their minds in the next 48 hours. After the stunt the shark just pulled out in the middle of the water, it seems like her and her facility are probably in hot water. But Dr. Susan is far more invested in the project than she probably should be. This isn't about financial gain or financial prosperity for a company. She has skin in the game. Her father died from Alzheimer's disease. And to be honest, her desire to cure Alzheimer's makes her a liability to everyone around her. She and Russell make their way toward the facility via helicopter. Russell is one of Susan's financiers, and he wants to see firsthand what's going on at the facility. It's clear that Russell has a pretty complicated backstory as well. Susan makes reference to an event that happened where he, quote-unquote, saved a lot of lives, but it's not quite elaborated on in the moment. Just as an aside, the music in this movie is fantastic. It's so much better than anything else in any other movie besides Jaws, once again. Anyway, Russell makes a reference to the facility looking like Alcatraz, and this seems like a bit of foreshadowing for our fishy prisoners. We meet the sharks for the first time along with Russell, and even though Russell is standing on a platform, it's still a terrifying moment to see him this close to these sharks. But we learn something else in this moment. Carter, a shark wrangler of sorts, is efficient at what he does. He swims with a large tiger shark, retrieving a license plate from its mouth in this weird gymnast type way. We also learn that the company Russell works for is Chimera Pharmaceuticals, which is likely a nod to the shark's brains being infused genetically with human, cells. A large shadow darts through the water as Russell is introduced to the shark test subjects. They are much larger and much more ominous than the normal shark population at the facility, aka the tiger shark that we just saw. Carter tries to determine exactly how the shark got out of its enclosure in order to attack that boat. He also mentions how hard it was to rein the beast back in to his friend Tom. We get an underground view of the facility and it's breathtaking, but it's also terrifying. It truly is a confined labyrinth of water, gates, and rooms. There's some tension between Carter and Russell because Carter sees Russell as just a suit. This plot point isn't irrelevant, but it isn't exactly integral to the story either. Next, we get to see the sharks feed, and it's brutal. They tear apart the tiger shark from earlier in a triad formation that shows that they are able to communicate and hunt more effectively. But for some reason, this only throws up red flags to Carter and no one else. LL Cool J and Russell have a moment. It seems that everybody knows about Russell's escapades in the Alps. Every time he talks to someone, we get a new bit of information that helps us elaborate on exactly what his adventures had entailed. This moment is the first of two nods that the movie makes to the fact that a lot of times Black people do not make it out of the story alive. The process of harvesting the future Alzheimer's medication from these creatures seems to be to increase their hormone levels, which directly increases the amount of proteins their brains make in order to help with extraction, which in turn increases their brain capacity and creates new neural pathways. As a result,
The sharks got smarter.
Russell points out that it seems crazy to him that there weren't any genetic changes made to the sharks in order to get this done. It seems like the timing of the overall project has been much faster than anyone anticipated. Obviously, this is a lie, and they are actually genetically altering or enhancing the sharks through this method in order to harvest more proteins. Bad weather is on the horizon, so the team preps for it, but they also prep the facility to show Russell what they've been working on. This is when things start to pop off. The first time things start to pop off. Carter goes out into the tunnel cages, and the genetically altered sharks start attacking him from both sides of the cage, pressing deep into the cage, again demonstrating the synchronized communication of their hunting styles. Not only that, they swim backwards and are cognizant enough to recognize when Carter raises his weapons that they are in danger. Carter leaves his oxygen pack in a specific area in order to lure the sharks to that area by creating bubbles and a ripple effect in the water. The trick works, and Carter is able to actually tranquilize the shark in order to bring it up to the facility. When they bring the shark up from the water, there's this insane moment where the practical effects are so cool. And the CGI in this movie is not fantastic, but to be fair, the CGI was somewhat in its infancy during this point. This is 1999 or something like that. The practical effects are amazing though. The sedative that Carter gave the shark is not as potent as they had expected, but the team is able to extract what they need. Once the information is plugged into the computer, they are able to identify that inactive neurons have become active. The neuronal activity means that their experiment has finally worked. Jim is celebrating. His hard work is finally completed, and he's having a cigarette near the shark. Then things pop off. Literally. His arm is severed at the shoulder when the shark randomly starts to attack. Before Carter can shoot the shark, Susan lowers the shark back into the water, desperate to preserve her new medical miracle. Jim is anesthetized, and a helicopter is dispatched to the facility in order to reroute him to a hospital. The storm cascades rain and ocean water to a negligible degree of visibility. But eventually, the helicopter is able to stabilize as the team hooks Jim up to a lever, which starts to raise him up into the helicopter. Then, things pop off even more. The lever gets stuck and Jim is carried out into the middle of the water. The lever ends up losing strength and plummets him into the open ocean, with our genetically modified friends all waiting for him. Everyone is watching this unfold in some capacity, either on a monitor or through the window. The helicopter loses control and crashes directly into the facility in a massive explosion. In one of the most epic shots I have ever seen in a movie, a large window into the facility under the water where the team is showcases Jim on the gurney with his oxygen on, flailing about as the shark proceeds to throw him and the gurney at the window, breaking the glass. Shards fly everywhere, and the team decides to get out of there. The glass breaks, and the facility has started its first portion of flooding. LL Cool J attempts to get a hold of anyone on the outside in a different part of the facility, but the facility system is now shot. And the facility is, like I said, flooding. It's built to have automatic lockouts when this flooding occurs, meaning that the characters are essentially trapped with only one way out, and they've just learned that the sharks are actually stalking them, busting through the steel doors that create a barrier between the humans and the predator. And obviously, it comes out that they did in fact genetically modify the sharks when they weren't supposed to. The characters go through a bit of drama, but I think the main takeaway from this scene is that we have a predator who is normally hunting instinctually that is now able to outsmart its prey. Moreover, what does any animal in captivity want? Especially an animal with the capability of cognitive reasoning. No one ever answers that question, and we move back to Chef and what he's doing. A shark begins stalking the chef as he hides from the fin above the water, moving through the facility. The chef was on the lower level, and the lower levels are flooding first. His life is in peril as he tries to wrangle his bird to safety, his only friend down there, really. Unfortunately, the shark blasts out of the water and grabs the bird before the chef can. The chef hides in an oven to avoid the shark's massive jaws. Unfortunately, the shark thrashes, and eventually that somehow turns on the oven, even though the oven has like a dial, and I didn't see that. But anyway, so he has to book it out of there. With the axe that he grabbed from earlier in order to defend himself, he hacks through the second portion of the oven. So it's like a lower portion, and then there's an upper portion of the oven. He hacks through it, and he jumps over the shark, flicks his lighter, and says, "You ate my bird," as he ignites the gas that is coming out of the oven and explodes the shark. Back at the team, they have now prepared themselves to swim to the surface, realizing that their trek through the facility is essentially futile. They put their wetsuits on and begin to argue a bit more about what they should do. Tensions are high because obviously their lives are being threatened, but they are also extremely frustrated with the fact that Susan never told them exactly what was going on with the sharks and how much smarter they had actually gotten. Focused on increasing morale, Russell stands near the opening of the facility where the group is about to dive into and gives a heartfelt lecture. This is essentially Russell's Braveheart moment. He talks more in depth about his experiences on the mountain. Russell knows what it's like to be in a very desperate situation with other people, and it is clear that he does not want this group to get to the point where his other group had been. This heroic moment is interrupted by one of the most shocking, I guess you could call it jump scares I have ever seen. I don't think anyone in the theater, anyone watching it for the first time would have ever expected this moment. The shark jumps from the small opening onto the surface and grabs Russell and pulls him back down into the ocean where the other shark that's with him is able to just chomp on his body. It's crazy. Never mind the logistics of a shark coming out of that tiny hole and then somehow being able to grab him by the torso, or the shark sneaking up on him. It's like preposterous, but it's such a cool freaking moment. Obviously, everyone is freaking out because they did not expect that to happen, and they realize just how dire things really are. And they decide to open the little hatch in the same room where they're at. This was a hatch that they didn't necessarily want to open because it seemed like a risk of flooding even worse. So they don't have time to wait at this point. The facility will flood and then things will continue to get worse for them anyway. Even if the moves they're making are risky, they're absolutely necessary. The team enters into an even smaller area with a ladder, and this is the elevator shaft. There is fire from above from the explosion earlier raining down on them. They're attempting to make it to the next level of the facility. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't know which level who is on. So like the chef, I don't know what level he's on, and the team, I don't know what level they're on. But I know that the chef ends up above them. So I guess they're maybe on level 1 and he's on level 2 now. Anyway, the ladder they were climbing up breaks, and Jan is exposed in the water for the sharks. She's pulled under and then comes back up in a grand gesture of power, it seems. With only 3 members of the team left, they are pulled up by LL Cool J. Tom, the facility's architect, lets them know that there's actually a way to drain all of the water out of the facility. Everything they do now is risky, so it's worth the risk because there are only a few options available to them. So obviously this is a very risky situation because they have to actually go back into the facility in the parts that are flooded and expose themselves to the sharks again. It seems a bit pointless that they ended up opening the hatch in the other room just to lose Jan and have to go back in the water anyway with the sharks, because ultimately they had to make exactly the same decision, going back into the water with the sharks. Before Tom leaves, Chef doles out some wisdom to him, talking about relativity. And he mentions that if you touch a hot pan, the hot pan feels like it's hot forever, but it could only be a moment. And if you sit next to a beautiful woman, it feels like a moment, but it could be forever. And I do not know what he's talking about in the context of the movie. I don't know which aspect feels like forever. I don't know which aspect is relative to him. And it doesn't really clarify itself when he says this. I know this is obviously a quote that Einstein said, or a play on a quote that Einstein said, but if you have any ideas, drop them in the comments. Tom and Carter set off to open the facility, and everything looks like it's going well until Tom ends up being eaten by one of the sharks. Carter is able to do what he needs to in order to open the door, and meanwhile, Susan lurks about in order to find her samples from her research. She doesn't want anyone's death to be in vain. Susan's tenacity and motivation and desperation force her into the position where she can take out another shark. So there are 2 down in the facility and 1 more to go. She does this by electrocuting the shark. Some of the dialogue gets a bit cheesy here, but the plan is to distract the sharks like Carter did at the beginning of the movie and send the air tanks up in a different area while the team kind of comes up on a separate area. So basically, they just want to rouse the water in order for them to be able to escape, and presumably the sharks will start to attack the air tanks instead of them. I guess the sharks are still slaves to their hunting instincts after all, with what I'm assuming is probably limited eyesight, and so they just kind of have to go with the vibration of the water. The 3 end up making it to the surface of the water, and as they are traveling to go to the shoreline, the chef is then grabbed by the shark. She travels with him for a while before he stabs her with his cross in her eye, forcing her to let go of him. The 3 people are left to sit on the surface, and a tourniquet is placed around the chef's leg where the shark had bitten him. Susan and Carter realize what's been happening the entire time. The question that Russell asked about a shark and what it truly wants has been answered. A shark that can think and has the predatory skills to best almost anything else in the ocean wants freedom. And the sharks have been using the humans the entire time in order to flood the facility to get to a point in their barrier under the water where they could break through, allowing them to eventually escape. So the 2 just cannot wait around. They have to be proactive. Otherwise, the shark will go out into open waters, become a nuisance, and a danger to everyone around. I'm convinced in an alternate timeline, this is actually Bruce the shark. So Carter goes to shoot the shark in order to blow it up with an explosive that is on the shore. But too many variables are in the way and he can't take the shot. That's when Susan decides she's going to jump in and distract the shark with her blood. I mean, and it's also her fault, so she kind of needed to be a martyr in this situation. She ends up actually drawing the shark away from the barrier, and the shark gets her and saws her body in half with its jagged teeth. Carter, still in the water, does his Carter thing and wrangles the shark. The chef, still on the surface, crawls to the place where the gun is and shoots the shark, but he ends up getting Carter's suit trapped in the shot with the shark. He blows the shark up and the shark meat goes everywhere. Carter thankfully gets trapped in the steel fence when the shark actually ends up breaking through it, and he narrowly avoids being a target in the explosion. Him and the chef, the black guy, survive. And that is Deep Blue Sea. I think the latter third of the movie is a bit over the top in action, but I ultimately think this is one of the best shark movies out there besides, obviously, Jaws itself. The premise is perfect because this is the only way that you could do a shark movie that makes really any sense and makes it actually scary. Sharks aren't a threat if you're on land, obviously, so you have to place the characters directly in the water with them, especially when the situation is confined. Jaws does this by creating a town with a mayor that is extremely neglectful. But ultimately, when people get the gist of what's actually going on, they stop going in the water by themselves. They don't need the mayor to tell them anything anymore. It's that simple. Obviously, there's a lot more to Jaws after everyone knows what's going on because the shark is still a threat that will constantly loom over the ocean and it has to be hunted. But after that point, there's no longer a problem. You can only do this premise so many times, as evidenced by the multiple iterations of Jaws sequels that just blatantly do not work. The Meg tries to do something like what Deep Blue Sea did, but it's done in the least thoughtful way possible. It's a fun, action-packed movie. I liked the first one, but it doesn't pack even half the punch of Samuel L. Jackson randomly being taken out while standing on a platform by a shark that comes out of the water. Deep Blue Sea also stands out because it has great practical effects, beautiful cinematography, and phenomenal acting, as well as the fact that the plot does not center around something that you can't even remember happening like it does in The Meg. So I love this movie, and I hope I've encouraged you to rewatch it or watch it for the first time if you haven't already seen it. If you stayed for this long, you might as well subscribe because I'd love to see you back next week for the next video. As an aside, I wanted to remind you that this channel is not a review channel specifically. I do reviews, but they are solely left to shorts and not my actual videos, my long form videos. So if you're interested in movie reviews, go ahead and check out my shorts, and I will see you next time on the next video. Bye for now.